Imagine traveling 5,000 miles, arriving in another country for the first time, and realizing that you will be staying there for a year or more. You look around and the people look different. The foods are not what you're used to. The housing accommodations do not match where you have lived. And then there are the hundreds of cultural differences. That is the perception of many international students who are attending one of the 6 major universities and some of our local high schools in Northwest Indiana. Joining us to talk about the lives and experiences of these visitors to our region are Holly Singh, who is the Director of International Students and Scholars at Valparaiso University, and Dallas Kinney, the Assistant Vice Chancellor for International Affairs with Purdue University Calumet. I want to welcome both of you to Lakeshore Focus.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
You guys have some really impressive titles. I mean, scholars, the Director of International Scholars. Did you come up with that, Holly?
Well, in 2008, when we were reshuffling the office, we were creating a new 2 director positions, 1 director. So one was Director of Study Abroad, and the other one was supposed to be Director of International Students and Scholars. And as our numbers were increasing, it made sense for us to put both of those.
You get 2 jobs. That's the deal, right? That's
Correct.
what they do in academia.
That's right.
Right? And you're new to the area, right, Dallas?
I am, yes.
Okay, from Michigan, so not very far away.
Originally, but most recently from Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we get a few people coming out from the cornfields to our new cornfields here, so this is good. Hey, to start the show, I thought it would be a great way to maybe let our viewers kind of hear maybe a couple stories from, what is it like, as I said in my intro, a student comes from India or China or any of these places, first time to the United States, they fly into O'Hare and they have to come to Northwest Indiana. What's that like for some of them? What have been your experiences of those first time arrivals?
Well, the cultural and the geographical differences are such that, of course, they don't understand, where they're coming to, for example. So I had one of my Indian students come in, and he was brought in with somebody who I knew very well, and she's like, "Oh, he was in Beverly Shores, and he was walking on the road, and I just gave him a ride." I'm like, "What was he doing in Beverly Shores?" So when I asked him, he's like, "Well, I came about 5 days back, and I was staying with a friend in Chicago, but then he, said that take the South Shore line." And I just dropped myself at Beverly Shores, and I was going to walk to Valparaiso. And I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad that my friend found you." It would have been a long walk. But he comes from a place where everything is close by, or there is public transportation, to reach from place to place. He does not realize 10 miles is a long, long, long walk.
Well, that's interesting, because I've heard a similar story to that many times about the students who come into O'Hare and then go, "Okay, I need to get to Valpo," and people go, "Yeah, right." So
correct. Or they take a cab, and suddenly the cab is going to cost them $500 to come to Valparaiso.
Yeah, it's a long way. You got a good story about students arriving here for the first time and what they see or experience?
Well, one of the interesting things for me is how people perceive food. Food's very important for us in our home life, and often what startles us the most when we go abroad is the food we're presented with. It has a very emotional attachment. Americans, for example, many of them grow up eating one or 2 kinds of rice, for example, but rice is all pretty much the same. But when students get to the cafeteria, they're coming from India, Japan, China, they eat very different types of rice. So if it's not their type of rice, it's the difference between us eating, say, raisin bread and flat bread or something like that, pita bread. To us, there's a lot of differences between bread. They don't come from a bread culture, so for them, maybe all breads are the same. So some of them are kind of shocked, so why don't you have my kind of rice? Because I can't really eat this. This is not what I eat at home.
So do you explain to them we have American rice?
Yeah.
It's the American version of rice.
Yeah.
So let me ask you all, from your perception, just generally in this region, Northwest Indiana, do students find this to be a welcoming place to international students? Are we welcoming or not so welcoming?
I think it depends from community to community. I think at Valparaiso, for one thing. In the university campus, they feel they're welcomed because we have many cultural activities. We have many ways of getting them involved. Whereas, if they would come to a smaller school or to a school that does not have activities for them, then they could easily think that they're not welcoming. So it's more of the perception per se than the welcoming or not the welcoming part. So as any school that plans to have international students, if they're not prepared to accommodate their needs, one of the biggest needs being the cultural adjustment and reaching out to them and sharing their culture and asking them to share their culture. If there are no provisions for that, then it becomes very, very difficult.
Now, Holly, I know that periodically, despite the fact that you have this really incredible title, that you drive the van back and forth to O'Hare periodically to pick up loads of them. So for the students from India, when they see you, they probably go, oh, somebody from home.
Right.
But how about the students from Japan or China or the Ukraine or someplace? Do they kind of like, oh, who's this guy?
Correct. So it plays out both ways.
They think you're a taxi driver?
Right. Well, maybe that's okay. Possibly. But I think seeing another international person kind of opens up the doors. They, in a way, it doesn't matter to them. They see, oh, somebody who has gone through what I would be going through in the next year, 22 years' time. And that's one of the first things that I tell them. I'm the director, but I was an international student.
So that
I have personally gone through it.
That helps. So when they see you, Dallas, they probably go, you look pretty American, pretty traditional American, maybe even a little academic with the glasses and the gray beard, right? And so how do you kind of quickly try to deal with that cultural difference or break that down?
Well, like Holly, I was a study abroad student too, so sometimes I give a quick anecdote where I tell them that I lived in Egypt for 3 years, and I had to deal with many of the same shocking nuances that they have when they come to this country. I've sat in classes where the native language has been Arabic for 5 classes in a row, and you're not allowed to speak English, and it goes on week after week, month after month. And I realize how hard it is to make an adjustment, but I also succeeded, and I ended up in a good career, and I think you can succeed too. If I can do it, you're much brighter than I am, I think you can do it too.
That's probably really important to establish that real quickly with them, that they can see that you've been somebody who's been in their shoes. Same way that they see that with you pretty quickly, but you've just got to say that to them. So our audience kind of gets a feel for this. How many international students do we have now at Purdue University Calumet?
We have about 700 now.
Yeah, I think that's a shocking number, probably for people in Northwest Indiana, to know that there are 700 international students at Purdue Calumet out of about 10,000 students, I believe. Mm-hmm. Profile a little bit where most of the students coming from?
Sure. The biggest single group now is Saudi Arabia, about 300 students. China, about 230 students. Then we have a fairly large group of Brazilians, 60 or so from Brazil. Another group of similar size from Ecuador. And the rest are pretty much spread out between 40 different countries.
So what was it like during the World Cup for all the Brazilian students there?
You could hear a pin drop. They were all someplace watching it, yeah. I was watching it too.
Yeah, you're right. It probably was a pin drop because I don't think they were cheering real loud at that point when toward the end.
After the 4th and the 5th and the 6th goal.
Yeah. So about 700 students at Purdue Cal. About how many students you've got at Valparaiso University?
Over 500 in the academic programs and close to 100 in the interlink English language program. So over 600 total students.
And your students are roughly from?
So the biggest population is China, then Saudi Arabia, then India. And those 3 populations constitute about 70% of our students. And then next would be Ecuador, Iraq. So we have a big, close to 20 Iraqi students studying at Valparaiso.
Yeah. I think your 2 campuses probably make up for the most, and I said, we probably have around 2,000 students. I mean, that's about 1,400, but I am it's kind of surprising sometimes when you start talking to IUN and St. Joseph down and even Rensselaer, and Ivy Tech even has a fairly large number of international students. I know one of their poster children for a long time was a girl from South Africa.
Correct. She's at Valparaiso.
She's at Valparaiso University.
Yeah.
You guys stole her away.
Absolutely.
Did they let you really do that?
Well, she finished her 2 years at Ivy Tech, and then she started in our business program.
And you guys got her in admissions now, don't you?
Yes, and she's in the IT. She's finishing up her master's in IT as well.
Yeah.
So.
Good move. I've met her. She's very sharp.
Yeah.
So that really adds up. And then if we add in, I mean, all the exchange students that come here to the high schools, and then even faculty. I mean, about how many international faculty do you have at your campus? Rough.
Close to about 15 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can still have more, but as as the numbers are increasing, I think the university is seeing the need for making their faculty more diverse as well. So, especially in engineering and business, because a lot of our international students come to the professional programs. So,
and I think you've, got 30, 40 international faculty, or people with international backgrounds probably at your campus?
Yeah, it's about right. Yeah, and they're from all different parts of the world, really. Asia, Africa, Latin America. Yeah.
So we're a much more international kind of community, I think, than some people realize. What do you think is the most difficult adjustment that international students make coming here?
climate.
Okay. That was a really quick answer.
I think the winters are something they probably are not used to, except for students coming from Mongolia. I think they adjust very well. But students from India and Africa and Saudi Arabia and China, it's hard. But it's not that they don't like it. In fact, sometimes they look forward to the cold winter more so than the locals here, because it's different.
I think I've told Holly this story before. The first year I had a few of the Indian students in one of my buildings. One of the guys says, "How cold is it going to get here?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you. Why don't you go stick your arm in the freezer, in the refrigerator?" He goes, "Oh my God!" I said, "Well, actually, you need to hold your hand full of ice, and hold it in there for a while with it ice in your hand and ice." And he says, "Oh my God!" He said, "And actually, it'll be colder than that." And they were all like freaked out by it. So what do you think the big adjustment is?
I think that's a good point. Weather's a big shocker, depending on what time of year you come, of course, but it passes. I think it's really interacting with people. Often they have a low level of English. Indians don't so much because that's one of their official languages is English, but many other cultures, they're struggling. They're still speaking in some ways like an adolescent, but they're trying to speak to adults, and they have kind of an identity crisis. They're trying to master English. So I think that's tough on a lot of people. Yeah.
I've noticed, some of the things that we correct people in English, like using, saying the and an and are just absent in other languages. And so when we hear people talk in their own translation, they talk in our way of thinking like a child. But in their language, that's not true. Do they feel that, or do they see that, or how does it get acted on by other people?
I think that, especially when they're in the general community, I think there's more sensitivity and understanding on campus because there's so much experience with international students as colleagues, as friends, students, professors, living in the dorms together. And plus, it is kind of an international community in some ways, but when they get out into the community, people haven't had that experience. I think they can sometimes tell just in their eyes that whether they're being respected or not when they're trying to talk, express themselves. So I think it varies.
To an extent, internationals rely a lot more on cues other than language. So, while they're having a conversation, they are very aware of if they're being accepted or not. Mm-hmm. So they totally understand sometimes our superficial hello, hi, and they can, see through it. I mean, especially we say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And we just pass them by. And they're curious, like, if you ask me, "Hi, how are you?" Why did you just pass me by? Why didn't you even listen to what I have to say, how I'm doing.
I wanted to tell you how I was doing.
Yeah, yeah. So to them, that's not just passing by saying. They think if you're saying hi, how are you, you should wait and
answer the question.
And
Well, is there what's the distinction between knowing that you're being respected and knowing you're being accepted? Is there a difference? Because you use respected and you use accepted.
And I think respected is the first part. Accepted is something that requires both sides to an extent. I think if they feel that they are respected, then they would move towards the point where they will feel that they're accepted in time.
Do you see much of a difference between those two?
Yeah, I think Holly's right. I think they're closely interrelated. I think respect has a lot to do with trust as well. You respect somebody, but the most common reaction is fear of the unknown, I think. And before you can really respect someone, you have to understand them and get past that wall of fear. And that takes some interaction. But I think that all being said, the Midwest generally is, in my experience, and hearing from international students too, is probably the most friendly part of the United States. As far as people, you going to your neighbor and chatting and them taking the time to talk to you, a bit of an extended conversation. The Northeast has more of a rushed reputation. People kind of rush by and rush through things. In the South, they may not be, there may be more fear of the outsider there. But the Midwest, I think, is better than most places that way.
And I've heard most students that I've dealt with, I've actually dealt with quite a few international students, seem to be pretty positive about that kind of experience with people in our region. They feel like they're friendly and so forth. But have you heard of, I know there's been incidents where people are like, wow, I was treated very poorly. I mean, what happens in those situations, Holly?
I think anytime you have a huge population or there's a new influx of a big population, whether they're Saudis or Chinese or Indians, I think as a community, the reaction is, they're scared, as Dallas said, that, scared of we're scared of the unknown. So the community sometimes reacts, differently to the Chinese, a big group of Chinese, a big group of Saudis. And then they label everybody together. And, it's, and we've had sometimes incidents where the students have been targeted to the point that they've been told, hey, go home. For some reason, they see them together. And international students sometimes end up being together, whether they're in housing or they're doing things together. So when they're perceived to be not mixing and have a huge group, then the reaction is that
it's like a little gang or something here.
Correct.
I'm afraid of that.
Yeah.
Do you see some of that too? I mean, what do you see, that negative side?
I haven't seen, I've heard more stories, I haven't seen it up close, but some things I think you have a certain negative element in any community, and they express that negativity onto those of their own kind as well. And sometimes people run up against that element. It could be teenagers just kind of wilding down the street and throwing cans out, pop cans or beer cans out the window at passersby or whatever. And it could be any number of things like that. And it happens to be an international student that gets caught up in it. They think, wow, where have I come to? Is this something I can expect from this society? And is it because they hate Japanese or because they hate Chinese? But often it's not. Occasionally it is, but not as often as people think.
Kids. It's just sometimes kids being kids and,
right,
and that kind of thing.
And there's a certain formalism in a lot of societies, like the Japanese and the Chinese and the Indians, so how they will interact with you because you're more older and more respectful would be different than how they would interact with somebody who's of their own age. Here, there's no filter. The Americans truly don't have filter. They say what they mean, but the internationals are surprised by that. That you have to be different to somebody who's older than you are, who's your father's age, and then of course you act differently with people who are of your age.
Right. So we're down to just really the last few seconds here, and just for our viewers, just a thought about, what's a good thing that we should be doing to help them feel more welcome and appreciated for being here? What do we need to be doing?
I think just being proactive, walking up to them, say, how are you doing? Are you getting where you're going? Do you have what you need in any situation they're in? And I think they very much appreciate that.
And being willing to listen to the answer, right? Okay.
Correct. I mean, I think internationals, when they come here, they expect you to be the host. And as a host, they think that your responsibility is to ask them how are they doing. But as Americans, we always think, if they need anything, they will ask us. So that's where there's a gap of understanding, that they're ready to ask us to take a lead, and we are saying, if they need anything, they will take the lead. So I would hope that the Americans, after listening to us, will say, okay, if there's an international person, it's their job to take the lead.
Be a little more proactive. So we should be asking the questions, trying to listen to the answers, and really trying to make them feel like that this is home for them.
Correct.
This could be their new home. Thank you both for being here, and appreciate the work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for
look forward to
having us.
continue to interact.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thanks. I'm not sure anyone realizes what it is truly like to be a stranger in a strange land. Until you travel to another country, particularly when that place has a distinctive language, culture, and landscape. Make sure the people there look very different from you, eat food which you cannot recognize, and dress in clothing that's not your style. Are you feeling like a stranger yet? I know that the world has become more homogeneous. Dress has become a little more universal. You can access a variety of foods nearly anywhere, and English is spoken by a pretty large number of people. But it's still difficult to function in an alien environment. Of course, there can be excitement, surprise, joy, and enlightenment. You also can have feelings of confusion, misunderstanding, embarrassment, perhaps distrust. Let's reverse the situation and think about international visitors who come to our region. They may experience those same positive emotions and some not so comfortable feelings. How we treat them makes a huge difference. For most, we must imagine ourselves in those circumstances, which I've been explaining. If you have not traveled to one of those places in the world where you are the odd person, it may be difficult for you. Just try. Often, our reaction is to poke a little fun, laugh under our breath, say a few things behind other person's backs. We're attempting to lessen our discomfort, but it may be feeding our insensitivity. Communication is so important. Work a little harder at trying to listen and comprehend what the person is saying. Ask the visitor to repeat or slow down. Apologize for your lack of understanding and your difficulty in grasping what they are saying. Compliment them when they get their point across to you. It will build their confidence and make them feel more comfortable. Offer to show them around your community, maybe your home. Most of them want to understand our culture, the way we live, what we believe, how we think, how we act. Good hospitality goes a long way. It makes visitors feel like they are important and you are glad they are here. Even if you have not had the experience of being the stranger in a strange land, you may someday, and hopefully you will be treated in a way that makes you feel like you are at home. Thank you for watching. We really want to hear your thoughts about our show. Send your comments to our email address on the screen or reach us through our website, which is also listed. You may want to visit the website and watch past episodes of Lakeshore Focus. There are some great shows to enlighten, entertain, and educate. Join us next week for another Lakeshore Focus. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick saying, make a positive difference in our world today.